Welcome back to the Fantasy Hockey Podcast, Unsustainable Wednesdays on an actual Wednesday this time, not on Thursday. Well, I still have plenty of time to screw this up and have this go out on Thursday. So we're recording this on Tuesday night, so I guess there's plenty of time for this to end up being on a Thursday. But I'm going to assume right now this is going to be on a Thursday. Episodes being
on a Wednesday,
on
I
a
hope.
Thursday. Oh, no, it is. Yes, you're right. You know what? I'm messing up words already. I'm actually really looking forward to 10 takes this week. We skipped it last week, but I have so many things to talk about this week. I feel like there's just a lot of topics. I think the first one not the first one, because obviously we're not doing 10 takes, but something I did want to talk about on this episode before we get into this in 10 takes eventually is like COVID. I mean, This is just brutal. All the postponements. It is so hard to not only make unsustainable calls because teams just aren't playing. It's so hard to manage a roster. I mean, are you finding it difficult to manage a roster? Because I sure am.
It's borderline impossible, depending on how many
It's
leagues you run.
It's insane. I mean, I made the joke today to Brandon. I was like, it's a good thing less people care about the NHL, because I feel like if people cared as much as like the NBA or whatever in terms of social presence, like they'd just be getting ripped right now. I mean, I don't really see. I see this being just as bad as MLB personally. I think it's been handled just about as poorly. I mean, we heard rumors of the Devils having a situation, and then Buffalo gets it. And it's just insane to me how we keep having things break. It feels like at this point the NHL is just saying, "Well, we'll wait till you get it, and then we'll postpone it." It feels so, I don't know, wrong, and players are actually getting it. It's not like just a lot of, hey, we might not you might not get it. We're going to wait until there's a scare. It's not that. It's like players are actually getting it. And we're just like, oh, well, too bad. Sorry. Going to quarantine, I guess. We'll see what happens. Hopefully it doesn't get worse. But I'm certainly frustrated and honestly kind of disappointed at how it's all played out. But we'll leave more of that take for 10 takes. Anyways, let's start off with Unsustainably High. You could start off since I had some COVID rant. So go ahead.
Sure. The first one I've got here is Nils Hoglander. I feel like this shouldn't be too surprising, but he has been entirely too good for like a minute now. And I think that one of the things that is interesting, he actually doesn't have quite the ownership numbers I expected him to in Yahoo, but he gets a lot of airtime for whatever reason. It seems like he's in our circle more than maybe he is in the wider audience. But the main reason, and typically when people show up on Unsustainably High that are, especially if they're not like known names, it's usually time on ice related, and that's what the problem is here. That and no top power play. Those two things, you combine those two things, it's too hard to keep up consistent points. Like if you think about any like decent player that doesn't skate more than 15 minutes a game, isn't power play one, they're not rosterable basically. And that's where Hoglander fits in right now, unfortunately. I actually think there's a lot of upside with him, and maybe we see him break out if he gets, good deployment again, if there's an injury or something. But I think for now, there's no reason to hold on to him if you're considering dropping him. Just go for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm in the same boat with Nils Hoglander. I think the time to own him was when Miller was out. Now that Miller's back, there's really not much reason to own him anymore. Okay. My first one here is going to be from the New Jersey Devils, Ty Smith. Now, I know you just put him on long-term target. I'm going to have to disagree with you there in this Unsustainably High episode, because a drastic thing that changed was that he's no longer top power play and hasn't been consistently. I know they're in this postponement hold, and so in a way, I might not need to talk about him because of this postponement, but I think it's important to note that he hasn't been top power play. He's pulling points from essentially nowhere. His minutes have also dipped quite a bit consistently for the last 2 games. And like when you're looking at a guy like Ty Smith, to me, 2 games makes a big difference. If for 2 games you're not on a top power play, that's a lot of time. And that's enough for me with a guy like Ty Smith who already has a short enough leash. Like I'm not buying in. I think he's unsustainably high. If you want to hold on to him, I don't blame you. I think there is some upside there. But I do think that you should have quite a short leash.
Yeah, that probably does make sense. All right, my next one here is Jordan Greenway. I feel like we've talked about him on and off occasionally, but never really given him like the time to really go into like what's happening with him. I mean, for the longest time, he was not really a relevant player. Longest, I mean, he hasn't been in the league that long, but what's happening right now is just absurd. He's in on basically every point that happens when he's on the ice. The shot rate when he's on the ice is super high. His shooting itself is super high. His shots aren't good, and his hit pace is actually down from last year. So realistically, like when you look at what package you're getting from Jordan Greenway, a player who, by the way, does not play any power play time, none of this adds up. And what you're going to see is like he's going to drop off, but he's going to drop off really, really hard. Like, I mean, sub half point per game pace. I would expect him to be like on a typical season, he'd probably be in the 35 to 40 point range this season. Off to a point per game start, as we all know, 5 points in his last 4 games, but none of this makes any sense. And it will come like just rocketing back to earth real soon. So I think there are other options I would rather have in Minnesota. Eriksson Ek is one that comes to mind, who similarly has some unsustainability to him, but at least has more going for him than Greenway does. So if you have both of them available on your waiver wire and you want a Minnesota player because of a good schedule or whatever, I'm going with Eriksson Ek on that one.
So I like Greenway as a short-term target for this week specifically because Minnesota just had a good schedule and it fit in with me, and I actually ended up picking him up. But that being said, I do agree with you. I think that what's happening right now is just too absurd. And the fact that his shot pace isn't good, his minutes aren't really all that high. I like him, but I don't like him enough to kind of hold long-term as someone who owns him now. My next guy here, moving on to the Philadelphia Flyers, JVR. I don't think we've talked about him enough. He's been on a tear, just had a 4-assist game. People are hyped. He's the highest owned guy, the highest ranked guy in FA in a lot of leagues. And what's interesting is a lot of people are kind of hesitant to pick him up. Kind of rightfully so. His IPP right now is 93%, meaning that for every point that happens on the ice, he's involved in 93% of them. So essentially, all of them. His power play shooting percentage is at 45%, which is pretty high, and 4 of his 5 goals so far have been on the power play, and he plays 50% of the power play time. So it happens to be that power play he's on is the one that's killing it at the moment, and he has 13 points. A lot of this is unsustainable. He's averaging 15 minutes a game. He hasn't seen a big increase in minutes with his production. His production has gone up, but he hasn't seen that minute jump either to go along with it. You might say, okay, he's been doing really well, and because of that, he's being rewarded with more time. That hasn't exactly happened. For the most part, he's been on that same 15-minute-ish pace. He was on this last year. He played the exact same deployment last year as he's getting right now, almost to a T. He played about 15 minutes last year. He's playing about 15 minutes now. Last year, he was on a 50-point pace. Maybe he does a little bit better than that, but I would expect him to be more of like a 50 to 60. So is he a drop? No, but he is unsustainably high. It's one thing to remember for people who are new to this show is unsustainably high is not a player that we're saying sucks. Get rid of him right now. He's the worst. That's what drop candidates is for on Monday. What this part of the show is for is to tell you, hey, this person looks a little bit out of line, and we don't really expect what's happening to keep up. So we're pointing you in the directions of here's what you should pay attention to. Once this falls off, or once this starts to happen, then that becomes a drop. And that's the case with JVR. Him, it's really just points. I think they'll fall off at some point. I don't see it continuing.
Yeah, I agree with that. My next one here is Nicholas Backstrom. So he is a shooter now, I guess. I mean, not really. I mean, his shot pace is up 20%. It still puts him below 3 shots per game, which is kind of like the shooter level to me. If you average 3 a game, that usually means you're a pretty good shooter, or rather a shoot first player typically. He is not there, even with his 20% increase in shot pace, but kind of similar to Greenway, except for the fact that he actually has ice time, is his IPP has jumped, his on-ice shooting has jumped. When you combine like an increase in IPP or on-ice shooting, either one, that is like dramatic. So let's put these things into perspective a bit. Last season, Backstrom's IPP it was 60%, and his on ice shooting was 11, almost 12%, with Ovi on the ice, of course. This season, his IPP is 76%, and his on ice shooting is 17%. So if either one of those were to go up, you'd start to be like, okay, this is a little fishy, possibly sustainable, maybe, depending on how much it went up. If both of them go up, you know something's up. And that's what's happened here. So we're
on ice shooting percentage. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
that's one of the highest I think we've ever referenced on an Unsustainable episode.
It's up there. So he's got 13 points in 10 games. Again, not saying like he's a drop candidate or something insane, but he's definitely a sell high candidate because this is going to come down as well. I don't know if he goes all the way back down to last year where he had 54 points in 61 games, but I kind of expect him to be like a 70-point player with not very good peripherals. So I don't really expect this shot pace to keep up either. I think we're going to start seeing, especially with Ovi back on the ice now, I think we're going to start seeing him be like a pass first player again. And not be quite as opportunistic with his shooting in general as he has like a 20% shooting on the season. So that's Nicholas Backstrom for you.
That is an insane on ice shoot. I mean, I get he plays for Washington and they have Ovi and whatnot.
Well, this was with Ovi. I mean, Ovi's been out for 4 games, so.
Whew, that's true. This all happened pretty much over the span of Ovi. No, that's insane. Okay, my next person here is going to be Tyler Mott. 44% owned, which is absolutely insane. Now, I understand the peripheral part. I think the peripheral part of Tyler Mott, totally sustainable to an extent. His hits are insane, but we've seen players keep up ridiculous hit paces before. It's not like his minutes are so low. It's not like his minutes are so low that like he can't keep hitting like this. He's at around 60 minutes a game. He can keep hitting at that pace. Now, his hits pace is up quite a bit from last year, but he did have a good hits pace last year, too. It was at 285 last year, 355 now. It's pretty much higher just entirely because of those minutes. And so if you're holding him for his peripherals, fine, but don't be expecting a lot of points from him. Even his 41 point pace right now is completely unsustainable. He has a 20% shooting percentage. Expect this all to come down to earth at some point from the points perspective. Hits are pretty much the only reason to hold on to Tyler Mott at this point.
Yeah, I agree. He definitely has the hits though. So
yeah, he does.
But I've got no more for Unsustainably High, by the way.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Yeah.
I've got one more here, and that's going to be Brandon Saad. This might change a little bit with McKinnon being out a little bit, but not too much. He's still only getting about 14 minutes a game of ice time. Not very good. 35% power play time. It's just not. Oh, and he has a 15% on ice shooting percentage, by the way. So remember how we were talking about Backstrom? Everything's crazy. Oh, and by the way, his own shooting percentage is 38%. Yeah, this is not holding up. He will come back down to earth. He's getting less minutes than last year, and last year he was on a 47-point pace. I expect him to be about that 45 to 50-point guy. 50-point, I think, is his ceiling. I think 40-ish to 45 is more what I expect him to fall into from a points perspective. And I've only got one unsustainably low, so I'm going to jump to that guy and then let you kind of run through the people that you have. Now, this was one of the most requested players to talk about, and that's Jake Gensel.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to be hopeful for with Jake Gensel. I know it's been rough owning him, but there are some positives. His minutes have not gone down. His minutes are still the same. His power play percentage has actually gone up, so he's playing more time out. They're playing that first unit more, which might be because they're not executing as well. But still, the fact that he's gone up so much in power play percentage is a really, really good sign. So I like that. His IPP is actually exactly the same as last year, pretty much. That really has not changed. And so you keep wondering, okay, well, why is he so... What's going on with him? Well, one, his shooting percentage is a little low for his career. He shot at 15% last year and 17% the year before that. Right now, he's at 11. So he could have an extra goal, and right there, he's right at where he's been, right? So goal, give a goal there. The place where he's lacking in the most, and I think this is with all the Penguins, if you look at all of them and why they're all suffering, especially like a Malkin or whatever, his on-ice shooting percentage is what's hurting him. It's at 7.7%. So the team is just not putting pucks in the net. But if you see a player that has fine IPP, fine minutes, and good power play percentage, but what's low is the on-ice shooting percentage, what that tells me, if you're not on a team like Arizona or, well, not Dallas anymore, but if you're on a team like I guess Arizona's the only one now. But if you're on a team like Arizona that just as a whole doesn't put the puck into the net that much, I would expect that to come back up. Last year, it was 11% for him. The year before that, it was 11%. So I expect that to be more around 11%. So what does that mean? If his IPP is fine, it means that as these goals start to go in more while he's on the ice, that on-ice shooting percentage comes up, his IPP will stay the same, meaning he'll get in on 66% of those points that go in after that, 8% of on-ice shooting percentage. So I think he'll be fine. And mind you, he's, 49-point pace, not great, but if that on-ice shooting percentage comes back to normal, he's still on the pace he was at last year. So I'd hold and not even sell. I wouldn't sell him. I wouldn't do any of that. I would just be patient.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have Evgeny Malkin here. It's not exactly the same story, but his deal is his IPP is super low. So last season it was too high, which, I mean, kind of is understandable considering he was on a 110-point pace. But it's at 50%. It should be more like, for a player of his caliber, we should be looking at something like at least 70% probably. So that's a good amount of points that have happened with him on the ice that somehow he just wasn't a part of. I do think that is going to kind of come back up. And if you were to give him the benefit of the doubt there and add 50% to his point total, you're looking at like 7 or 8 points in 10 games. And then there are a little concerning things. I think he may not quite be as good as we thought he was going to be to start the season. He is not shooting as much, but then there's no real explanation for that. So that's not great. We want to see that turnaround. And then his power play percentage has dropped, but I do think that was probably because of how elite the Pittsburgh power play was last season. They just kind of never really needed to put a second unit out there. So we'd like to see more. I mean, he's only got 1 power play point, so you can really point to the power play more than anything about why Malkin is not doing better. So in a similar capacity, I would just kind of wait and see with him and not like have a panic attack or anything.
I will say the other thing that I don't like about Malkin is his line. Because they moved Rust up to the top line, I really don't like Malkin's even strength line. And it's something that is worrying me about Malkin. And if I were looking at the Pens team and thinking, okay, Gensel I'm not worried about. Malkin, I could be worried that he is quite a step below what we expected him to be. I could see it happening at least. I see the path to that happening if they continue to give him this crap even strength line and he just doesn't shoot as much for whatever reason and that sort of thing.
I'm only worried about the shots right now. His line, I don't know. They've shuffled his wingers around his whole career and it never seemed to matter. Yeah. And he's got Zucker, who's not horrible, and Kapanen, I don't know. He seems to be good enough to put on the top power play for some reason. So, I'm not overly concerned with him yet. The shot pace is definitely the biggest concern, but I think I would just point right at the power play issues and kind of be like, this is why I'm not super concerned yet, is because I do think that their power play is good and that he will be able to factor into more points. All right, next up, Mika Zibanejad. I feel like a lot of people have, between Malkin and Zibanejad, they are probably the 2 highest drafted players that I've heard people say are on their waiver wire or are being sold low. The fact that both these guys have been dropped several times from what I've even seen is just crazy to me. If you thought, with my analysis of Malkin, again, maybe he doesn't live up to what we thought he was going to be, but he is absolutely not a drop candidate in literally any format. So if you look at Zibanejad, it's even more so. His shot pace is not really affected. I mean, it's down slightly, but it's still, well over three shots a game. His power play percentage is fine. His on-ice shooting is low, and his IPP is 25%, down from 80%, which means, see, this is like the opposite of, if the on-ice shooting and the IPP are up, that means somebody's super unsustainable. If the IPP and the on-ice shooting are both down, which in this case, the IPP is down by 69%, and the on-ice shooting is down by 42%, those are huge, huge, huge numbers. So that just shows that he's wildly snake-bitten right now, crazily snake-bitten. And I get, he's got 2 points in 9 games, but that should be pretty obvious that he's snake-bitten. But those are gigantic numbers. He's missing a significant amount of points. His shooting percentage is at 3. It was at 19% last season, almost 20. I think realistically we should probably expect more like a 14, 15% shooting, maybe even less. but still not 3, obviously. So there's a ton of things to point at as far as the Zibanejad's concerned about where things are not working for whatever reason at the moment, and that they should be. The next one here is Jonathan Marchessault. Another guy that I've heard a lot of sell talk with, and I feel like it made sense for a while there. He was starting to get pretty questionable deployment from on-ice numbers. He was getting pretty questionable shot numbers, and he was getting pretty questionable power play deployment. What we're seeing now is all of that has been reversed over the last couple of games. He played 20 minutes in his last game. I get that includes a little bit of overtime, but that's not a huge difference. Last season he played 17 and change, so it looks good. He shot plenty in his last few games, and his power play percentage is back to what it was last season. So he's got 5 points in 7 games, which is roughly what to expect from Marchessault. So the only real concern I'd have is maybe his shooting's down, but it seems like that's come back around. His hits are right in line, so he's as advertised at the moment. I would not be overly concerned unless you drafted Marchessault thinking he's like a point per game player. He's not a point per game player. He was never gonna be a point per game player. What you get out of Marchessault is a guy that's gonna hit 1.5 times per game or so, and he's gonna get you 3+ shots a game, maybe 4, and get you like 60 points. That's Marchessault, and I mean that is a lot of value in a lot of leagues. So
yeah,
let's.
I think if we see his shots fall off, that's where I lose a lot of interest in Marchessault, because I think that there's a lot of 59-point guys out there.
Yeah.
But what Marchessault gives you that makes him so valuable relative to everybody else is his shots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess in that regard, right, like on one hand, if his shots go down, sure, he loses value, but at the same time, it's really just a readjustment of expectations and calibrate what you're thinking. It doesn't make him bad, but it definitely would get me thinking. Would start to get me to think, okay, where am I going to make up these shots? For example, if you drafted in the sense of you were expecting a lot of shots to come from Marchessault and you start to lose in shots, maybe I target an Arvidsson somewhere to make that up. So yeah, I think the shots are the one thing with him that I want to pay attention to going forward. I know they came up recently, but does that stay? Does that stick? Because right now his shot totals are about 100 less than last year, which is a really big deal.
I'm not worried about it. It seemed like they were playing with deployment a bit for a minute there, but I mean, we'll see. Maybe it is a problem, but as of right now, I'm not overly concerned by it. It's only been 7 games after all because of the postponements. And then my last one, it's a team, is the San Jose Sharks.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Evander Kane and Brent Burns specifically, I think, are the names that come up the most. Evander Kane's a little bit more concerning than I find Brent Burns to be, but and that's because of his most recent kind of dip in points, and that was a line shift thing. So they've been playing the Donato, Couture, and LeBanc line a lot over the last couple of games. I don't know. I'm not that worried about that. I don't think that's something that sticks around forever. But with Burns especially, Burns is playing more minutes than he did last season. He's shooting more than last season. His IPP is a little low, and his on-ice shooting is a little low, and their power play just can't get things done. So that's Burns. And what are the teams they've played so far, right? Like, who are the teams in that division? And then what are the teams they've played so far? The San Jose Sharks have played Arizona, Vegas, Colorado, and Minnesota. It's like, I get that that's like a pretty stingy division to begin with, but they haven't played LA or Anaheim yet. And the next 4 games they're going to play are LA twice and Anaheim twice. And suddenly we're going to see them do well, and people are going to be like, oh, I accidentally sold Burns for somebody. And I would not do that.
Really hold, but that argument doesn't really hold when that's the majority of the teams they're playing against.
They've only played 8 games. He's got 4 points in 8 games, and he hasn't played any of the easy teams yet.
Right, but you're saying they've only played these hard teams, but that's the majority of the teams they're.
I get it, but we're talking about 8 games against the hardest teams.
So what? But the majority of their games for the rest of the season are going to
okay, but you're going to get 40% or 35% of the games against easy teams. And we're not counting any of them.
We'll find out. What if the Sharks are actually awful?
They are actually awful, but they can still score goals sometimes.
I think the Kings can be a little stingy at times.
No, they can't.
Absolutely can.
Anaheim maybe can. I don't know about LA.
Anaheim can be stingy too.
I don't know.
I'm low. I am very. Kane is pretty much what he is. I'm not that worried about Kane.
Kane is more concerning than Burns is. You're out of your mind.
Really,
if you think Kane is
I'm
better
the
than
opposite.
Kane's been.
I think Burns is more concerning.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yep.
Burns
Yep.
ice time, shootings, everything about Burns is exactly fine.
what?
Everything about Kane is down. Everything about Kane is down. If
I think
anybody's
Burns is
concerning,
like
it's why?
I think Burns is like a 45 to 50 point guy.
You're insane. He's already above that. I mean, he's a 40-point guy now.
He's a 40-point pace right now. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think he stays where he is
Oh,
now.
I will bet you any amount of money he beats 40 easily. Anything.
Oh, well,
anything.
That's why I just said 45 to 50, sir.
You
That's
said
why
40
I
to
said 45
50.
to 50. I'm not betting 40. I think 45 to 50 makes more sense. But I'm concerned about him. I mean, the power play is not clicking. That's one of the main sources of his points in the past few years of his career. If that doesn't click for
he has a higher power play point pace than he did last season, sir.
He has 2 power play points.
He's got 8 games played, man. What? How many do you want him to have?
I'm just not high.
If he had more than 2, he would be on a great pace.
I am not.
If he had more than 2, he'd be on a 30 power play point pace, man. Like, come on. we can't.
I think
we're overreacting to 8 played games. It's 8 played games, guys.
No, I'm not overreacting. I'm just saying, like, I would not be surprised to see Brent Burns be super disappointing.
Fine, but you can't judge him yet. I think people you're reacting to. It's been 8
Brent
games.
Burns too much.
I don't.
I'm not even saying he's bad. I'm just saying I could see him.
You're saying he's a 45-point guy. It's based on nothing.
So what?
On 8 games.
He was a 53-point pace guy last year. How is 45 so unreasonable when they arguably moved to a harder division?
I just don't buy it.
I don't think it's that crazy to say he's going to 45.
But why?
They're in a harder division. The power play isn't clicking. That's his main source of
He
points.
has more power play points pace than he did last season. What do you want from him? He's played 8 games. Give him a break. Give him a few more games to figure out that if he's trash or not.
Last season he only had 17, and that was good enough for 53-point pace. If it gets any worse, which I think it could, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it could get worse. The power play does not look good, and they're against harder teams.
Well, why are you drafting Brent Burns, right? Like, you're looking for a guy that's going to get 50-plus points as a defenseman with a good amount of shots. And right now he's at a 40-point pace with good shots and then he's going to play 4 easy games coming up.
Look, I'm not saying he's bad. I'm not saying that he doesn't have that ceiling. I'm just saying that me personally, I stayed away from him kind of for a reason, and I could see him disappointing. That's all. We disagree, I think, on where he falls. I think we're kind of saying the same thing, but also not.
Yeah.
Agree to disagree on him.
Yeah. I don't know. Kane I actually am more concerned about, but I still think that he's got plenty of time to turn it around. And the thing that makes me a little bit less worried is that we're talking essentially about 2 games where, and again, we're talking about 2 games where there was an ice time dip for Evander Kane and his entire line. It wasn't just Evander Kane; it was Hurdle and everybody else. That doesn't really worry me that much. The things that worry me a little bit are the fact that his hits are fairly significantly down and his shots are fairly significantly down, and we're seeing a bit of an ice time dip on the power play. That said, again, like, he's played 8 games. I don't know. I'm not willing to overreact on guys that have a good amount of potential value, including, especially if you have a PIM league or something. In a points league, I would be a little bit concerned because, I mean, he's never been the best point getter ever. You know, he's always been like a 60 to 65 point guy. You're not really going to get much out of him beyond that. Right now, he's on a 51 point pace. Again, like, he's 1 point more than that, and he's on a 60 point pace. Above that, if he had 6 points instead of 5 points right now, he'd be on a 62 point pace. We're talking about wild swings right now because we're talking about 8 games played. So I think everybody needs to kind of like stand back and take a look at the situation, because really you're talking about 1 game where he didn't get a point making the difference here. I don't know. It just seems a little bit too much to me.
I think the thing with a guy like Evander Kane that you have to remember too is why you drafted him, right? Like, it's the same thing as Brady Tkachuk. Like, Brady Tkachuk, you're not drafting him for the points. It's just nice to have. And I think Evander Kane in many ways is the same thing, right? Like, Evander Kane is a 58-point guy. he's not that far off right now. He's at 51 point pace. So, like, points wise, he's not that far off. You don't draft him for the points. Yes, the shots being down is pretty concerning. So that's one area that I look at. I'm like, well, damn, that sucks. His hit pace is down, but something that's he can easily kind of make up, I think. And I think a lot of what's hurting him actually is he's been taking a lot of penalties.
Yeah.
Which definitely hurts him, and that keeps him off the ice and also probably gets him in trouble. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is remember why you drafted Evander Kane. And if he's still giving you what you drafted him for,
Yeah, his pimps
then
are,
just kind of
are actually
hold.
amazing. But
Yes. So, like,
but I do think
if
that like the decreased ice time is affecting everything. Of course it is. So
yeah, I mean, he's in recent games at least. Overall, he's still at an 18 and a half-ish minute a game average time on ice on the season through 8 games. So on the season, he's fine. It's over these last few games that, of course, quite a bit has changed. Well, I guess that was maybe the most heated. That was one of the most heated discussions we've had on the podcast in a long time.
it's been time for that.
See what people think there. It's been time. It's been time. It's been.
I'm sure sides will be
simmering under the
taken.
surface. Oh, of course. Okay, let's move on to Sustainably High then and talk about the good players. My first one here, I'm actually going to take 2 because I have 2 from the same team. My first one is going to be Jeff Petrie, who I am very high on. And I think we saw him kind of erupt last season and do extremely well. These stats that I'm going to talk about, by the way, do not include tonight's game against Vancouver, in which he had 2 points again. So he has 11 points through 9 games, again, not including tonight's game. We're recording this Tuesday night. 100-point pace. Is that going to continue? Absolutely not. He has a 19% on-ice shooting. Okay? 19%. 17% shooting percentage and 4 goals. So that's unsustainable. So why do I have him on Sustainably High? So the reason is because his IPP is fine. His IPP is the same as it was last year. But I think that Montreal as a whole has gotten better. So here's where I like Jeff Petrie a lot to be Sustainably High rest of season. Last year, he was an 8.5 on-ice shooting percentage guy. I think Montreal's gotten better than that this year, and especially in the Canadian division where there's more goals to be had. Last year, he was a 46-point guy. If his IPP stays the same and we see this on-ice shooting percentage come back down to a more reasonable, say, 10 to 11%, which we see with teams that score a lot of goals, then you're looking at a 55-ish point pace out of Jeff Petrie. Of course, the goals are going to come down too, but I could easily see, that 55-ish point pace. He's got good shots. His peripherals, his blocks have gotten better. His hits have decreased quite a bit. But nonetheless, with Petrie, he's a guy that you got so late. All of this is just fantastic. You're like, oh, crap, I lucked out. This isn't what I expected at all. So my advice with Jeff Petrie is to just hold and continue enjoying the ride. I wouldn't pay anything for him right now. I think you'd be overpaying if you went to buy Jeff Petrie at the moment. Because if you're a smart owner, you're going to sell him for quite a bit. And he shares that power, and he's actually getting 74-ish% of the team's power play percentage. So they're playing that unit with Petrie a lot more. And of course, they have Petrie and Weber on the same one, but they're playing that a lot. The other guy from the same team that I want to talk about is Nick Suzuki. I am very high on Nick Suzuki. I like what he's doing a lot this season. If you watch him in the games, he's playing extremely well, and he seems to be one of the only players that is extremely consistent week to week. And mind you, that's how you got to look at Montreal, is week to week, not game to game, because they are so deep that for 1 week it could be Toffoli, the next week it could be Deneau, then it could be Kotkaniemi. It just shifts so much. But I do really like Suzuki and what he's doing at the moment. I don't think his current pace is sustainable, but for where you probably drafted Suzuki, he's going to be an absolute steal for you. Yeah. Or picked him up, yeah, because he was on the waivers in a lot of teams. So to me, Suzuki's just a guy that I would hold because you don't really know what his ceiling is, and you also don't know what his floor is. I can give you an idea of where his floor is. I think you could assume a 60-point pace is a safe floor for him right now. So I would just hold Suzuki because you could end up selling him what you think is selling high, and it still ends up being too low.
Yeah. Yeah. My next one, or my first one for Sustainably High, is Nick Ritchie, who I'm. I mean, he definitely is going to not be at the pace he is right now. Right? He's at a 73-point pace. That's probably not going to happen. But the main reason why he's on here is because he retained that power play 1 exposure with Pastrnak returning. That's a big deal for him. He's always been kind of like sometimes you stream him in banger type leagues. But now what we're seeing with him is a little bit of a decrease in hits, fairly significant actually, a huge increase in power play percentage. And coming with that, he's actually shooting a lot more, and he's getting a lot of power play points. So I think his power play point pace and his points in general come down. We start to see a little bit of shift back into hits slightly, with him with the reemergence of Pasta. But I actually think that like he might not necessarily be a totally like rest of season type hold, but somebody that you should always be thinking about, like maybe even first, like the first thing that pops in your head when you're streaming on a given week where Boston has a good schedule is like, oh, where's Nick Ritchie? I think that this might spell total doom for DeBrusque, honestly. Like I don't really see why they would replace Ritchie on the top power play with DeBrusque, because they've had DeBrusque there forever and it's never mattered. So if anybody's like negatively affected, I think it's probably DeBrusque at this point. But yeah, high on Nick Ritchie, at least for the short term.
Yeah, and I've been low on DeBrusque for a bit. I mean, even last season, I wasn't a huge fan, even for fantasy purposes. In real life, he can be fine, he's serviceable, but for fantasy, I'm just not interested. Whereas with Ritchie, I picked him up this week. He was a great streamer this week, and Boston actually has a good schedule. I'm pretty sure next week as well. So Nick Ritchie is a very interesting option to pick up. Okay, my next person here, I don't know if you're gonna love this, but Andrew Kopp. I'm liking him a lot right now.
All depends on what happens with Stasny, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing is I'm actually not as worried about Kopp now when Stastny moves down, because it doesn't seem that he's tied to that Stastny line. They're playing Kopp with, I believe they're playing Kopp with Scheifele now. So they moved Wheeler and Ehlers, I want to say, or Wheelers and Connor, with Stastny, and then they moved Kopp up to Scheifele. And
the problem is that it's already been mentioned that Stasny's moving to the wing when PLD shows up. So if he winds up top 6, that it has to bump Kopp. It can't bump anybody else. But it could just be that he winds up playing wing on the third line, which makes sense, I think.
We'll see. I mean, I think it depends on what exactly happens there. What do they do with Stastny relative to Kopp? But for now, with the minutes Kopp is getting over 20 a game, I'll take it. And his shot pace is just ridiculous. He's on a 282 shot pace, gives you about a hit a game, blocks every other game. This dude is for real. And I remember talking about him a while back. His ownership just shot up like crazy, so you might not even be able to grab him anymore. But I do like Kopp a lot for now, especially while those minutes are up in the 20s. He reminds me of a better Iafallo.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how I think. I think he's a better Iafallo. Similar, very similar.
Except no power play exposure. I mean, he has power play too, I guess, but
yeah, he's actually gotten this season 47% of the team's power play percentage, but it's not enough. That he only has one power play point. I wouldn't expect that to continue or to stay high. So when it comes to Kopp, you're banking on those even strength minutes, and if he continues to get that many even strength minutes, I like him a lot. And those shots, gotta love it.
Yeah. My next one is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. The funny thing is, not a lot of people necessarily asked about him, but I've seen so many trades involving him. And I'm kind of putting him on here as a warning for those of you that actually have him in your leagues, to be like, he is probably a second round pick at this point. Like if you're trying to think about your players in terms of like where you would draft them if the draft happened today, I actually think that like RNH is like a late second. And I think that like it's a sustainably late second. You look at how dominant. I mean, we already talked about how there's going to be like a bonus for being in that Northern Division where defense is like non-existent, but just how dominant that Edmonton forward core has been, even if they can't win games. What we're seeing with RNH here is an increase in ice time. We're seeing an increase in shot pace. We're seeing an increase in points, obviously. Although he actually only has a 75-point pace right now, which is interesting. I actually think that's going to go up. He's playing almost 100% of the power play, similar to last year, actually. Double shifted as he was. Power play points are even up from last season. The funny thing is, his IPP is actually low, and his on-ice shooting is lower than last season. So you can make the argument that he's not only underperforming, but he's significantly underperforming. He should be closer to a 100-point pace. It's crazy. I am really, really high on Ryan Hopkins. That's including the fact that he's got this crazy secondary assist rate going on. I'm really not concerned about that. I think we're going to start seeing more goals from him, and we're going to start seeing more even strength points, since it seems like everything right now is going through the power play. But I think that, obviously with RNH playing even strength with McDavid is going to be great for him. I mean, who else could you possibly want on the planet to center you?
I'm not gonna lie, RNH is someone I target to buy now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think someone
I don't think people have kind of realized. He only has 10 points in 11 games, and like I just mentioned, he should. I was surprised to read that, because I don't understand why he's not higher, and I think that he will be higher considering how much more he's shooting this season.
Yep, I agree. I really, really like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Okay, my next one here is someone that I really liked at the beginning of the season. If you watched any of our drafts, every time I would mention him, Brandon was like, no, I'm not touching him. I don't like him. I won't touch that guy. And, well, he's been pretty good. And that's Patrick Hornquist. Big fan of him. Now, is he a 96-point base guy like he is right now? You did once. You let me touch him once.
No, there was somebody else that you wanted. It was Lee. Anders Lee I never wanted.
No. Hornquist, though, there were many a time that I mentioned Hornquist and you said no.
Yeah, mostly because I thought we can get him at the end of the draft because nobody pays attention to him.
Mm-hmm. Now, he says that now. Hornquist, I was very high on to start the season. I thought he fit the Panthers mold perfectly. I think he's exactly what the Panthers needed, especially with that power play. I mean, already an elite power play. What did they struggle with in the past? They struggled with getting someone in the front of the net. They had some big men out there. I forget exactly who all they had. All a bunch of nobodies, because they were just looking for someone in front of the net. And now they got Hornquist, a specialist at playing in front of that net. He crushed it in Pittsburgh, and now he's crushing it with the Florida Panthers. And so I would expect him, most of his points, to come on the power play. Whereas with a guy like Pavelski or whatever, I'm a little worried about that, right? With a guy like Patrick Hornquist, I kind of expect that to be the case. That's where I'm looking for him to get the majority of his production from, especially with a team as good of a power play as the Panthers. Now, he's only getting around 15 minutes a game, but there are a lot of things that come with Patrick Hornquist that make me like him more. His shots are insane. He's on a 287 shot pace this season, up from last year, around the same. He's playing, when you look at his deployment and how everything has been kind of going on for him, he's getting almost the exact same deployment he used to get in Pittsburgh. They pretty much acquired him and said, hey, go do what you did for Pittsburgh, but for us now. And that's a good thing for him. He was a 50-point pace guy last year. I expect him to be that or a little bit better this season. I think there's a lot of things that'll come down. His shooting percentage is high. The on-ice shooting percentage is high. So he's not going to be this 96-point pace guy, right? That's not what you're expecting. But I do expect him to be very good. And I maybe like him, over a guy like Duclair. I dropped him in a points league over Duclair just because of that top power play and the shots. And I like that power play exposure more than anything. So for that reason, Patrick Hornquist is sustainably high in my opinion.
Yep. I mean, that makes sense to me. My last one, and I want to you might give yourself a pat on the back for Hornquist. I want to beat my back until it explodes about Victor Arvidsson, because I was talking many times preseason about how the only thing that makes any sense to me is that Victor Arvidsson was playing hurt last season. And again, we're talking about a player that I think right now is underperforming in a way, but I still think he's sustainably high, because 55 points for him as it is right now is better than it was last season. And everything about him suggests that that should be significantly higher than it is. His IPP is fine, but his on-ice shooting is only 6.5%, which is silly. He's shooting 80% more than last season. He's on a 328 shot pace. That's 4 shots a game. That's excellent for Cats leagues, obviously. I mean, there's very few players that put up those types of shot numbers. He also is blocking a decent amount, which I actually kind of figure will not keep up, but it is a thing that he's doing for whatever reason. And everything else is more or less like status quo for him. So I think the big difference is that he's shooting again. And that's what made him a good player before. He was a goal first, shoot first type player. And I do think that is going to translate into points sooner than later. He's already behind his expected goals for. He's, again, with his on-ice shooting percentage low, all these things point to an increase in, he's easily missing enough points based on his analytics that he should be point per game right now. His shooting percentage is half of what it was last season. It's only 5.5%. His on ice shooting pace is, like I said, 6.5%. Like there's it's not just room for improvement, it's room for correction. Like it shouldn't be happening this way. So it's not even that he's doing anything wrong. He's playing his game correctly, and he's going to be rewarded for it really soon.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually. And I mean, I just picked him up in a league. I got lucky, and someone dropped him in my keeper league. For whatever reason, he's ranked like 70 something. I don't know why he was dropped. And I was able to waiver claim him. I had the first waiver, and I grabbed him. So I'm very happy. His shots are just ridiculous. My last one here that we tried, I remember we were very high on at the beginning of the season. People were also high on him, but I think to varying degrees, was Victor Olofsson.
Mm-hmm.
Power play specialist. We were worried about what would happen. I always, not always, I don't remember if I said this or not, or if I just thought in my brain in the preseason. The fact that Taylor Hall was there, I kind of liked that for Olofsson a little bit. Maybe not for the goals on the power play, but I thought, okay, maybe the puck will move around a little bit better, and Olofsson will have a chance to get in on it. And that's kind of what's happened. The puck on the power play has been lower. It has played closer to the net between Hall, Olofsson, and Eichel. And it hasn't gone through the defenseman as much. That's why you're seeing a guy like Dahlin not getting as many points, even though goals are happening while he's on the ice. Because he's still playing a lot of power play time, just not getting any points. So with Olofsson, I mean, you gotta love what you're seeing. 13% shooting, 246 shot pace, right in line on ice shooting percentages. IPP is a touch high. That I would bring down. But 5 primary assists to 1 secondary assist. I mean, come on. That is a beauty. You love to see that. 25% shooting on the power play. I mean, this dude is about as sustainable as you get at the moment. And his minutes are still good. They're 18 minutes, around the same as last year. I am high on Olofsson. And with a guy like Olofsson, he's a similar guy, like I'm saying with some of these other people. You don't want to sell because you don't know what you're selling. It is his first real season, and now you add Hall into the mix. You don't want to sell a guy like Hall because Olofsson, sorry, because even I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't know how good he could be a point per game guy. Who knows? I don't know right now. Like I'm looking at this and I say, I'm probably more like a 70, but I don't know. What if he is point per game? What if he does just keep crushing the power play? So I would not be selling Olofsson. I think he's the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty into Olofsson.
Yeah.
I've got no other sustainably high players here. So
Then let's move on to the bums. It is time.
All right, I do have a handful of them.
Okay, you start him off.
My first one is Ilya Sorokin. It's just not the year for him. I've mentioned this a couple times. I think that like the plan going into the season was probably to play them fairly close to 50-50 with Varlamov getting like the extra nudge to like any kind of like situations where if they were going to play one more, it would be Varlamov. But I think what's happening is Sorokin's just kind of struggling right now. He's been playing mostly okay, but he has let in a few softies, especially in his first game. And with how Varlamov is playing for the most part, they haven't really needed to give that extra net time to Sorokin. So that's it basically. If you were picking up Sorokin, it wasn't because, well, I hope it wasn't because you thought he was going to like immediately steal the net, because that was not really plausible. It was either to handcuff, which is still like an okay strategy in some leagues, or it was to get a 1B as like a second or third goalie. And I just think in most cases he's not really worth hanging on to. In fact, I can't think of any cases where I would be hanging on to him right now. And he's still like 27% rostered. So I think those of you that still have him and are not in leagues where it's really, really deep or something, then I think I would move on.
Yeah, I agree. The writing was on the wall from the beginning, I think, too. Things just weren't working exactly the same as they were for Varlamov for whatever reason. My first one is going to be Alexander Romanov. I was very high on him. Now I really can't I don't trust him outside of like deep categories leagues. I don't see the points coming back with Petrie and Weber just crushing it on the top power play. And on top of that, he's now on the taxi squad for this next game, apparently.
I had him as well.
I just don't see it turning around unless you're in, like I said, a deep categories league. I think it's time to dump and move on. There's a lot of. I would rather have Pierre Oliver Joseph, for example. Rasmus Anderson is still lowly owned. There's still a lot of really good defensemen out there.
I'd rather have Dobson. I'd rather have.
Yeah.
I might rather have Mike Riley right now.
Yeah, honestly, I would. I would rather have Riley right now.
Is he still 0%?
I don't know.
I must do the research.
To one?
Is Mike Riley 1% owned? He got a power play assist. People must notice, right? Mike Riley, 1%. He did it. The man has done it.
Moved up. Congratulations.
Best calls ever on here on Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We call when a player is going to move from 0 to 1% owned. Right there. You heard it here first. You heard it here first.
That's when we're most proud. You'd think we're proud when we call a middle range player, calling him sustainably high. When we call a 0%er that ends up doing stuff, there's just nothing like it. That feeling just so sweet.
Still high on him, honestly. But anyway.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, my next one is funny because he actually just scored a goal. We're recording this Tuesday night. Is another rookie, Kirill Kaprizov. I think that basically despite the amount of minutes he's getting, he's just not putting things together from a peripheral perspective. And even if he was, the points haven't quite been there. So it's sort of like, why are you holding on to this player? Is it just because they're young and you are hoping for a lot? And I think that happens to a lot of people. They hear a lot of hype about a new player into the league. He's getting a lot of minutes. That seems great. But if this player is not going to take shots on a team that is drastically desperate for shooters, there's only so much he can really do. And I think that's what we're finding here. All of his numbers basically add up to what you'd expect. And you're seeing a guy with he's still, his point pace is decent. I actually think he's okay in points leagues, but he doesn't really give you much for peripherals. So if you still have him, and I know that a lot of his points came early on in the season, so he's kind of cooled off since then. I think the cooled off version of him is what to expect going forward. Although again, he did just get a point in his most recent game, but he's a guy that I'd rather watch than hold at this point.
Yeah, and it's a points league. Like you said, I'd actually maybe try trading him. I think he holds a lot of name value.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would look at the name Kaprizov and think, oh, maybe, especially with this goal that just happened, I might try to move him and see what people would pay, because you never know. My last two here. So I've got two. People aren't going to be super thrilled about them, but it's been a long time coming. My first one is Timo Meier.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So unless you're in a categories league, there's no reason to hold Meier, I think, anymore. I don't think he's worth it in a points league for the most part.
I have a feeling we're going to wind up with the same disagreement we had last for the other Sharks players, but
my thing with Timo Meier is is he going to be better than last season?
No, probably not.
No, and so was last year worth it in a points league? Not really.
Not in a points league.
I had him, and he really wasn't worth it. And in a Cats league, sure, because he gets you so many shots, but his hits are a little bit down. His minutes are down a lot. His minutes are down to 15 minutes a game.
Yeah, I did talk about that though, and I do think they may not totally turn around, but I think they'll be up a bit from there.
I don't know. I'm really low on Timo Meier. I think at this point he's similar to both of these guys. Erik Karlsson is my other one. I am very low on Erik Karlsson rest of season. Both of them, to me, though, the issue is that they both remind me a little bit of say you bought one bit of GameStop stock. At this point, you're so in the hole.
Why are we still talking about GameStop?
Why do you? It's a good analogy. Now it's the other circle. You held. Now you're in the hole a ton, and you have only one share, and you're like, I might as well just hold and see where it goes. That's kind of where Erik Karlsson and Timo Meier are. I wouldn't sell, because I don't think anyone's going to pay anything for them at this point. I also wouldn't necessarily drop. Actually, Erik Karlsson, I might drop. I think I might actually drop Erik Karlsson, to be honest. It's just absolutely brutal.
Yeah, he is blocks. Hard to defend at this point.
I guess he has blocks, but other than that, his shot base is down. He's not getting in on points, and I think that's kind of going to become the norm. I think he might have some good stretches where, for a bit, he's good. But I think as a consistent defender for the rest of the season, I don't think we see it from him anymore. I really do think Karlsson is a trade or drop at this point and see what you can get. But I mean, it's been 2 or 3 seasons now of 2 seasons of disappointment from Erik Karlsson, and I think if you try to trade him, people are going to think that in their head, right? They're going to be like, well, it's Erik Karlsson. He's disappointing now. He's disappointing again, and someone's trying to ship him off to me. Yeah, I'm low on him. Very low. Timo Meier, not as low. I'd hold Timo Meier a little bit longer, but he's getting there. For a points league, I'd drop him. I'd drop in a points league. I think you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree in a points league, I think. I've got one last one here. Jesse Puljujarvi. He's yeah.
Yep. Thank you. You've come around.
Sort of. He again is a player that I would be watching. There's the major thing holding him back more than anything is power play deployment. It's pretty clear at this point that you need to be on that Edmonton power play 1 to really have a dramatic effect. Like the other comparable to him would be Yamamoto, who's doing better, of course. But really, I mean, for as much hype as everybody's been giving Yamamoto, we're talking about a player that has a low shooting pace and a 52-point pace. Like, why do we care so much about him? His hits are all right, but like, you know who sounds like Yamamoto? Timo Meier. They're basically playing very similarly right now, except Meier gets you much more peripherals. Anyway, Yamamoto's not even my sustainably low, although he probably should be because I think he's like 70% owned. But anyway, actually, you know what? Just tie him in. I didn't do any research on him, but he belongs in here too. If you're not on that power play 1, it's going to be trouble. But the things I do like about Puljujarvi, I think I've covered ad nauseum at this point. He likes to shoot, and that's always a good thing to me. And he likes to hit, and that's always a good thing to me. You know, he's on a 134 hit pace. He's on a 201 shot pace, but we're talking about a guy that's only been playing 13, 14 minutes most games. If he can find his way onto power play 1 or just get additional 5-versus-5 time, or his IPP goes up, or he should be doing better than he is right now. But even if he was doing better, it probably wouldn't be quite enough, is the problem. That said, I do think, you know, as long as he's playing that top right wing, keep your eye on him because, you know, with Chason waived, I do think that means they are open to experimenting with that top power play. You know, they scratched Neal, they waived Chason despite playing him anyway after he cleared waivers. So, and we have seen him get a few spins on that top power play, including getting a power play assist. So there is some precedent there, but again, I do, especially considering, you know, he has one more game this week. If you're listening to this on the Wednesday that we released it, but he's not necessarily worth holding on to, you know, hoping something will happen. I think he needs something to spark it in a way, and that probably means power play time.
Maybe what they need to do is they've got to waive Puljujarvi. Because then he gets to be played. You only get to play on Edmonton if you get waived and clear waivers. Then you get to go back into the lineup.
Is that how that works? Everything's backwards in
James Neal scores 2 goals and then gets scratched for Chason, who just cleared waivers.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Makes no sense.
That's not what you do.
Nope. Okay, well, there you go. That is the Unsustainable episode. Let us know what side you sit on with the Sharks. I feel like Brandon and I are in a little bit of a disagreement there, just a bit. So let us know what side you sit on and what you think going forward. We will catch you for 10 takes and the weekend episode on Friday. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Yep, thanks for listening.